Welcome back. You're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by NEC Corporation on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Russ Roberts, the Transportation Security Administration's Chief Information Officer. Russ, before break, we were talking a little bit about citizen services and the way you guys are addressing it. One common theme that I've heard time and again during our conversation today is cybersecurity. You said at the very beginning, I don't want to bolt it on at the end. I want to build it at the beginning. So let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity, not just that it's a priority and it's important, but how are you addressing it, given just how much things change and how much that the pandemic and other things kind of continue to make your job more difficult?
Sure, Jason. You know, when you talk about, and we could have a 10-hour session on cybersecurity, but sort of, you know, I think it gets down to the basics of cybersecurity. It's I always say it's all about the data. Anytime I talk, I say it's all about the data. You know, systems and host protections are in place to protect the data, not really the system, right? You've got the confidential integrity and availability of the data is what matters most. That's the prism that I look through the challenges. You know, I don't want the data leaked. I don't want the data to get out. You know, when you're talking about whether it's classified data or personal information data, all those things, that's critical. Obviously, the integrity of the data for the systems that do all of the screening and all of the terrorism checks and all the things that we do. I need to make sure that data has not been corrupted in any way or manipulated. And availability, we talked about the stability at the very beginning. Those are the things that I think are the building blocks of our security, infrastructure and foundation. And those are the questions I ask. I start with the most basic questions. What I find is when I go out to somebody who's interested in doing business with us or it's a partner and I start to look at what's your boundary. Can you show me a depiction of your boundary? I'm amazed that a third of the time they can't. Another third of the time it's highly inaccurate. And a third of the time the people have a pretty good idea what's in their boundary. Those are the folks that, you know, have a chance. You have a chance if you know what's in your boundary. That, you know, I say that doesn't mean it's easy, especially when you're a large footprint. But even smaller organizations, I see they don't know what's in their boundary and they don't know when something new comes in. Those are the building blocks of fundamentals that need to be there. It's always about patching and scanning and doing patching and all that stuff and trying to keep up. Some of the biggest, most famous breaches in history are people who go to bed at night and think all their firewalls are configured correctly. So you got to be good at that. You got to be agile at that. And you got to stay on top of the building blocks that do that. You know, the computer network, hygiene, it's patching. And backups, you know, we talked a little bit at the beginning of this. Backups, test them before you have to use them. Make sure they work. You know, I think most of us recognize that. But sometimes we don't look at the really big things. What if that didn't work? Or what if that happened? What if we went blue screen? You know, the larger you are, the less segmented you are in general. And even an organization like TSA, it'd be very difficult. Something happened for me to figure out quickly what happened and what to shut off right away. So those are the things that I'm always concerned about. As a CIO, when you talk about as I'm the person who authorizes systems, my business is risk management, not risk avoidance. But I need to understand the true risk. You know, to do that, you've got to have a great staff. You've got to have a staff that gives you the truth. And I don't ever want my CISO or that organization to water down the findings. Let's talk about them and let's figure out what we can do. We try to be the office of yes. And if there's a no, then you know, part of our responsibility is to tell you how to get to yes and how to do it in a timely manner and to accept some reasonable risk where we need to. I was in a meeting with our administrator, you know, not too long ago, and sort of out of the blue, he said to me, you know, there are a bunch of the chief executives of the agency there, and he said, Russ, explain to me what your risk philosophy is. And now when my administrator asks me that out of the blue, you know, it's an interesting question. I think all CIOs ought to have that at maybe 2 or 3 different levels. What is your risk? Well, my risk tolerance is not 0, right? I can't operate in 0, and I need to have an understanding of the operations. But at the same time, it doesn't mean anything's a go. So those are the things we always balance. And you better know if something goes wrong, what's it going to do? And the stars shouldn't have to align for 6 months for something bad to happen, because we can always tell you why you can't do something. So those are the challenges. Make it realistic. And then what's the mitigations for that? That I think is my most fulfilling and most worrisome job that I have as a CIO at TSA, because our mission is so critical to make sure that we do that. And to do that, I have to have really good folks. I have an amazing cybersecurity office with amazing folks that will come in and shut the door on me and tell me if they don't think I'm doing something right or I need to worry about something that I'm not worried about. And that to me is a mature, healthy organization. We try to get it right most of the time. So that's sort of my philosophy on cyber. We've talked about zero trust and all the things, the department, we're in line with that. CDM, all of those things are building blocks, they're pieces of it. But back to that basics, back to understanding what if this happens, and is it worth taking that risk? And sometimes it's not. And sometimes the CIO is the only one who thinks it's not. So you better get your facts together. And we talked about collaboration. I want to have visited you 5 times before I tell you there's no way we're doing that. So those are things that I think are very important. Train your staff. We have an amazing phishing program that goes out there and offers football tickets and all, free turkeys and all that kind of stuff. And I can see over the last 2 or 3 years, we're getting better and having fewer and fewer people click on those things. And that's really important, because those phishing attacks are really what end up getting you. Security awareness, insider threat, all of those things are things that we as an agency, not just in the IT side, but are very concerned about. And we work together to try and mitigate as much of that as possible. So I think that's kind of the basics of cybersecurity through my lens.
So I got to ask you, when the administrator asked you, what is your risk? How do you look at risk? Did you have an answer? Were you prepared? Or how did you answer it as much as possible? You can tell us here.
Well, I should go back and run around and ask him, did I do okay? I think I did okay.
You're still here.
Sometimes doing these things, Jason's really important, because it helps you to frame what your philosophy is. We all have our philosophy, and it changes a little from time to time. But yeah, because I come with an operational perspective, that's the side that I come from. And that's the side the administrator come from the number 2 person at the Coast Guard. Operations are critical to do the mission. So I don't live in a pure IT world. Some things, if we've got a specific threat or risk out there, boy, that's important. And then maybe I follow up with, we do what we can up front, and we have a schedule and a plan to mitigate that down the road. But I talked about that. It's not a zero risk, sort of what I started with. Mine is my job is to measure the risk and to evaluate, and to put protections in place where we can, and sometimes to say we can't do that. But I walked them through that. I said, I don't live in a zero risk world, and I weigh very, very heavily the mission requirement out there before I make a decision. And then I just decide timing. And then if we have to, I said, and if you and I have to have a one-on-one conversation, to understand that, because sometimes these are very, very, very complicated issues. But I get outstanding support from the rest of the offices, and our administrator is fantastic and really recognizes the value of cybersecurity. So I'm fortunate in that area.
You always need that leadership to say to you, yes, I get cybersecurity. It's amazing how many times CIOs have told me over the last 6 months, my leadership didn't really understand the importance of IT until the pandemic. And then all of a sudden they needed IT to work, and they realized how important it was. One thing that occurs to me is a little bit outside your swim lane, but let me ask you, I think TSA, and you correct me if I'm wrong, they have an enterprise risk management office or someone who leads that effort. How do you work with that person? Because obviously, as you said, there's always risk in anything that's technology.
We do. And we have it. Every couple of weeks, we have a meeting in that group, certainly every month, and we have big issues to discuss. And sometimes I'll bring a risk to the organization and say, this is a risk here. There's some mitigation. It's very, very important because if there's some new threat out there, something that we'll need to do. And I'll use that to my advantage to help, to formally, put a risk on the table of something that needs to be looked at. And I don't do that very often. In fact, I've probably only done that a couple of times since I've been in this position. But sometimes it's a collaborative effort to talk about we want to do this, but here, at this risk, I want everybody to recognize this piece, and then also to recognize that I expect the resources in place to close the loop at the other end, and to do the following 10 things before I say yes. I think it's value. You get immediate buy-in in that way. And if we have to have a difficult conversation, it's good to have all the right people in the room to do that.
Russ, we've talked a lot about the digital transformation piece. We've talked a lot about some of the digital identity and vetting stuff that you're working through. Give me a sense of, in the last minute or two we have here today, what other priorities do you have? What else is on your plate? What other things are you juggling over the next 6 or 9 months?
Well, I always start with my top priorities, the people, right? And that execute the mission, make sure we train them, retain the best folks, aggressively hire the right candidates. In IT, it's really hard. It's very hard. The competition for resources and frankly, sometimes the salaries, I get great support on that, but it's tough. You can't wait 6 months to hire a professional. And 6 weeks is sometimes too long. So those critical ones, you need to go and get support. And I get great support from the head of the human capital office. If I need something, she's not turned me down. She doesn't like it when I come her way, but it's those things are really important. Support your team and build trust in both directions. That's what I always start on the priorities. And then probably more of the things that you're thinking of, I want to expand our mobile capabilities because we do have that diverse workforce. We want to have things a lot more self-help where you can go in on your phone and do your human capital form or put your leave in and make it easy. You don't have to come into the office to do those things. Travel vouchers, all those things. We have federal air marshals out there that still travel a lot, and that's really hard for them to get all that stuff done with their heavy mission impact. And so the good news is we got a lot of things that we can make more efficient in the agency, and we're working hard to do that. We're finishing up the deployment of 365, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams are the next thing so that we're in line with what the department has, Power BI, all that stuff, leveraging all the data we have in the agency. We can do that much more efficiently and effectively. My biggest challenge there is budget and resources. And then, we're deploying a new human capital hybrid cloud solution. And that will enable us to bring in that stuff. I started to talk about the mobile, being able to do a lot more self-help and get things done and be more efficient. Those things are on the horizon. And most importantly, I want our screening workforce to be able to trade leave and shift leave at the last minute, to be able to say, hey, my daughter's got a soccer game on Friday. Can I trade with somebody? And it shouldn't be that difficult because other places do it. We're working to make that possible for a better, more effective lifestyle, happier lifestyle of that incredible screening workforce we have. That's the most important folks we have in the agency out there providing that security on the front lines.
Russ, there's a lot more I could talk to you about, a lot more to follow up with you on, but unfortunately we're out of time for today. First, let me thank my guest. Russ Roberts is the Transportation Security Administration's Associate Administrator and Chief Information Officer. Russ, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Jason. It was a real privilege, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by NEC Corporation on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Ask the CIO.